All right, talking about MOOCs.
MOOCs.
Although you had a picture of the day, do you want to explain?
Yeah, let's talk about the picture of the day first
Yeah.
to frame.
Yeah, to frame the
Frame the
discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was on Shorpy,
Uh-huh.
and when I was on Shorpy, which is this kind of 100-year-old blog, supposedly, that does all these old school great photos, they had this wet glass photo.
Mm-hmm.
And it is of the hanging of the 4 conspirators in Lincoln's death. So Booth didn't act alone.
So Booth was with 3 other people?
Well, 4 people helped him.
4 people
Aided
in
and abetted
addition.
him, in
Gotcha.
addition to Booth. So if you
All
put
right, yeah.
the image,
Let's put up this picture so you can
actually,
see.
you actually can see the hanging.
Yeah.
And that was so crazy because if you go on Shorpy, and it's the picture of the day today for Shorpy, you look at them and you get to one point where you just see the bodies.
Right.
And then you see all the Union troops around.
Yeah.
But it's just thinking about that kind of that point in history, and that was like all blood and guts.
And
It's
what
like
I'd-
hardcore violence.
Is there a transition between that image and what we're talking
No, I
about
just like
today?
the idea
just
of
like-
the image of the day, and I liked how it was like.
It's convenient.
I liked how it was so like gruesome.
I wondered
Right.
if these, were like instructors and how we're all hanging together,
We'll hang together.
Yeah.
As the
if
MOOC
MOOCs
form.
don't go well,
Hanging in
that's
the
where-
MOOCs.
where we'll be.
Yeah. Well, funny, the MOOC name, one of the big criticisms around the MOOC is the name. And I
Yeah.
actually like it because I had a friend in high school named Mookie,
Uh-huh.
and that was the nickname we called him. So I just
Well, I was
think
thinking
of
of
Mark
Spike.
Haber.
Well, I think of Spike Lee.
Yeah.
So.
That's right. That's the other Mookie.
Right.
Where's my 250, Sal?
That's right. Exactly. Well, and
Why ain't you got no brothers on the wall?
I'm not sure who. I think it was probably George Siemens who wrote. One of the problems is it's got another. In Spanish, it means mucus, and
Yeah.
there's another connotation to it as well. So
Yeah, I actually had never even heard of MOOCs until last year in DS 106.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was my introduction to the whole idea and framework of what a massive open online course is.
They've been around for a few years. I mean,
Yeah.
since 2008, I think, or even as early as 2007, because Wiley, I think, had one of the first really open classes. And one of the things that's interesting to me is there have been a lot of open online courses. This is not traditional or unique to the MOOC.
Right.
But what is the fact that this idea of massive, and we could argue about whether that's how important that is or not. I don't know. But the thing is this kind of invitation sense.
yeah.
And then Alan Levine has talked about this, like this opening up and saying, hey, come take the course. Come
Right.
create a community around it. Like we're seeing that with the Stanford's artificial intelligence course now. They're opening it up. They're inviting it. The University of Illinois at Springfield, that was a big invitation. And that's what I think Siemens and Downs and Cormier did a really good job of, is like inviting people to take this course as a kind of research space when they did their first MOOC.
Right.
And I think that was really fascinating.
Yeah, and there's the idea of I'm actually trying to find the quote that I saw, but that's just kind of this experimentation. I haven't found the answer. I think is what Siemens says. Follow me.
Yeah.
Instead he's saying I'm experimenting. Join
Right.
in. I don't have all the answers.
Right. Learning is a messy process. Why try and pretend that you've packaged up this beautiful thing? Feel free to fail
And
in
this
front of everyone
and this
learn
idea,
something in the process.
this idea of all the answers and having all the answers was kind of the spark of a debate, a little bit of a debate between Wiley and Siemens about whether MOOCs were going to be the model
Right.
for the future of online learning. And I agree with Wiley. I mean, no, it's not going to be just one thing. It's not going to be just the MOOC. But I do think that both Downs and Siemens' experimentation with the MOOC, as far as the work I've done and experimented we've all done with DS106, has been
Yeah.
a blast.
Right.
Kind of throwing it out there and dealing with it. Like, there is something there.
And-
Well, and go
Well,
ahead.
I was just going to say, and like you said, in terms of whether massive even matters, I don't know that it does, because I wouldn't consider DS106 this massive open online course experience. There were certainly quite a few people who participated regularly with the online thing, some that came and went, but in terms of overall numbers, who cares?
That's right. And one of the things of DS106 versus some of these other MOOCs we'll see is that was a lot more scalable. It
Yeah.
wasn't huge numbers. Like, I mean, Downs and Siemens are victims of their own popularity. Like, they have
Right.
thousands of people sign up.
Right.
And I'm sure that artificial intelligence class at Stanford will too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be hard to scale interaction, scale kind of participation and all that.
Right.
That's a lot of work.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the scalability issue, because I think people are very concerned about that.
Yeah.
The learning management system coming into existence because of the scalability of this
right.
stuff. And I think the scalability kind of, if you start to treat this as a as a situation where you've got this giant community of practice, you've got all kinds of interactions that can happen on these sub levels. You know, you've got these sub communities that can occur, and it happened with DS 106. You can have this peer kind of review, or you can have this peer learning that goes on that's separate from the instructor. And I think the instructors are so worried about managing this whole thing. If you just kind of let these subgroups happen and develop out those communities of practice, I think you're in good shape to quote unquote manage it.
Yeah, and down to Siemens having good about letting go and
Yes,
saying, look,
you have
you're
to.
on your own. You have to do this.
do.
We can't. But the thing is on the other hand of that is, you know, whether people stay engaged because of interaction, because of that community that's built up out of it, is another question. And how do you foster it? Because you can't completely divorce yourself from that interaction as a professor, I would think.
Right.
Like, you have to be a part of it, or
Sure.
there has to be a way for an outlet for it, or kind of. So that's really a tricky thing right now. And there is no answer. Explore with me is the right approach.
Yeah.
But how do we get at that spot where, you know, we get the interaction? Which brings me another course to mind, which I think is interesting, is Boone Gorgas, actually, and I like to call him Gorgeous because he's gorgeous, but he recently tweeted about, or wrote a blog post about him teaching a WordPress course at Queens College with no sense of it being open or online. But the idea and I commented, I said, I would love to take this class. And here's a great class where you have already a community built in.
Right.
It can be intimate enough that we can actually share and learn from each other rather than just kind of I like the kind of small, intimate, here's a great idea for a class. And plus me and Martha and all of us can model classes. We want to do something like WordPress on what he already did.
Right.
So it's really this awesome professional development opportunity.
Right.
And I was just gonna say that's just one of many that you were saying that you want to do. I mean, there's so many now that are coming out, and that's the biggest problem with me is I want to do it all, and I know I'm not going to have the time to do it all. And there's ones where it's like even the artificial intelligence one, it's sort of like I want to do it just to see how that becomes a model for other courses. You know, it's not so much even at that point. Maybe it's just, you know, because we're educational technologists, but it's this idea of like I want to take that just to know how they do it. And I mean
That's right.
It's still early days, I guess.
But I think it also fosters a model for learning going forward, in that you dabble in the things that you want to, you immerse yourself in the other things that you're really interested in,
right.
and you know, get that engagement naturally, as opposed to having this artificial, you know, here's this course, here's what it's going to entail,
That's right.
and go from there.
And that's the beauty of it, the idea that you don't have to take the course in the same way.
Right.
Exactly. You know, the thing that I always worry about, and you kind of experienced it in DS 106, was this idea that, you know, the students are kind of, some of them take the approach that they're in it for themselves, and they're in to get the grade. They're in to do what they think a traditional course should be, and you know, if we can get this idea out of the way that they're not competing against each other, it's not a competition. That's not what education is. It's this idea that you're learning with others. Everybody can get A's kind of thing.
That's right.
if they're willing to put in the work and to have those conversations, to make those connections.
And that's really, I think that's a great point, because it's that competition that often can make it seem toxic. Like then you
Absolutely.
have this idea of what did
Right.
you get? I mean, this invidious
That's right.
comparison.
Yeah,
and all
why
that
didn't
stuff.
I get the grade that he got because
And
I
we've
thought I did
still
this
gotten
much?
some of that in DS106,
Exactly.
which seems amazing to me, but
Yeah,
I'm
have to
dealing with
break
some of
the
it right
students of
now.
that.
You know, it's amazing. Well, yeah, I was talking about this idea, and this kind of gives the professional development, and, you know, we've seen people in Noyce professor wrote about this already in terms of Zach Dow and stuff with professional development. But I want to take Gardner's Network of Networks, so his whole one about the kind of professional development and the digital imagination.
Right.
I'd like to take Boone's WordPress class because I need to get my WordPress ninja going. I'd like to take, go along with the the MOOC EDU, or no, the Change.
The Change one.
Yeah,
Yep.
the one with Siemens and Downs.
That's the mother of all MOOCs, I think was the way he phrased it.
But the thing with that, and this is interesting, and I would like to see what others think is, the thing with that is interesting is that you have a new speaker every week.
Right.
And like you wonder how you're going to bring it all together, and you wonder how, you know, is that a kind of like IT conversations? Or how do you bring in the interaction? How do you foster it? Because I understand the interaction has to happen amongst the people.
Yeah.
And I think they're thinking about it. You know, they're working with Georgia Tech on that. They're thinking about it as, this is a resource that other courses use. But then how is it more, then it's more like an OER than a MOOC, because the class almost depends upon the interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
if they're just lectures that they're going to discuss, I mean, how do you kind of generate any kind of activity in that that's not artificial?
That's right.
I don't know.
Yeah, and then the fact that they're doing it in Illuminate. I mean, it
Right.
raises a question. I mean,
That's right.
We kind of, this is our experiment to get away from Illuminate a little bit, right? I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
what we're working through. DS-106 radio, but also this. I mean, Illuminate to me brings back all the worst parts of the classroom,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
That's right.
So
I think any of those it reminds me of calling it like the blackboard of kind of communication devices. It's this thing that's designed for massive amounts of people, and I don't know if it necessarily gets at serving the needs of what that is, and it may, but it's just, to me, it's just kind of another this thing that we're doing right now,
Right.
in many ways kind of gets at it. And we've got a maybe a stream that we're looking at that
Yeah.
gives us feedback.
Right.
That's right.
It's not the way.
Yeah.
It's a way, and I think it's a better way, and more people need to work on the other better ways to
yeah,
kind of
and
get
I
at
don't
that.
think doing it in Illuminate completely compromises the process,
No.
but it's also kind of a mindset of getting away from Blackboard, getting outside of those spaces,
That's right.
and kind of distributing it like the idea of the MOOC is. It's a distributed space.
That's right.
I mean, the MOOC EDU, Jeff Liebau has been doing some awesome stuff for that Springfield stuff. I mean, he's been getting Skype interviews on with people, Skype discussions, doing that just like we did with the Google Plus, experimenting with that, how that works. He's just been going crazy with, I think he's using Ustream.
Yeah.
But like having a steward like that, to kind of steward a community and get
Right.
people talking and kind of, I mean, that's one of the things you really got to think about with this space.
Well, I like George Siemens' terms that he used, the learner concierge. It's like it's
Yeah.
a place where students can go to kind of address the confusion, and it probably couldn't be much more than a discussion forum,
Yeah.
but to kind of frame it in a way that students get that extra little assistance to kind of help them along, because there is an issue with MOOCs about whether a student is even prepared to take advantage of this kind of learning.
Yeah, and that's one of the kind of arguments that David Wiley brought up against, not for every learner. Some
Right.
learners are going to have a problem orientating themselves in this space. And Wiley's right, but at the same time, I don't disagree with Siemens that they're going to have to be in this space. They're going to have to exist in
Yeah,
this space.
and they're going to have to struggle, and
search
they're going to have to fail in it
Yeah.
in many ways.
Well, and I think, the argument that it's not for everyone is sort of the same thing that comes up with when people mention Khan Academy. And they sort of say, oh, Khan Academy can be this model to where nobody needs to go to college anymore. Nobody needs to go to university because you can just go online and grab that stuff. Well, that's not for everyone. I don't
that's
think,
right. It's not.
there are certain people who either by situation need to do that because they're in a third world country and that's the only way they're going to
Right.
get a decent education, or people who would prefer to do it and learn better that way.
Yeah.
But
If you see learning as acquiring a skill,
Yeah.
that's a way to do it.
Right.
If you see learning as going through and making these connections and having those connections mean something to your learning, then
It's
that's
not gonna be
that's
anything.
not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
right.
And if anything, I mean, what is happening with these MOOCs in some way is that we're reimagining the way in which we produce
Yeah.
educational
Yeah.
resources.
You're right.
I mean, and that's really cool. It's like where it's becoming the part of the process, not something
Right.
alien to it.
The process is the key that we're talking about here. There is no showing your work in Khan Academy.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah,
no
that's right.
showing what the struggle was
Right.
and how you came up with this.
That's a great point.
So
And that's a real big difference. And
Yeah.
it's also a community of people you want to work alongside of.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to define your experience in a classroom here in a university
Right.
or online.
Right.
And that's why I think one of the models I liked about DS-106 is you had a great group of people just going along into it, like locked in. And I'd like to see if taking all these MOOCs over the next semester, if that is the case,
Yeah.
and how we can help build it.
yeah, exactly.
Well, I think we're running out of time, but I think we covered just about everything we wanted to.
Great.
All right.
All right.
We'll see y'all next time.
Thanks, guys.
DTLTT for life.
For life.